Hello, Paula.
Hey, Paula.
Hi.
Nice to meet you finally.
Yeah.
Put a face to your name.
Yay, we're getting Shaktis.
Good to have some Shaktis. Oh,
Another one for they're streaming in.
Oh, another one.
Welcome,
Hello.
Lisa.
Hello,
Welcome,
Lisa.
Lisa.
Hello, good
Hi,
afternoon.
Daniela. Welcome, Daniela.
Hello, Daniela. Welcome. Where are you based, Lisa and Daniela?
I'm in Portugal.
Are you in Portugal? Okay.
I'm
Lisa?
in Granada, Spain.
Okay.
Lisa, you're
Hi, Julian. How are you?
where have we met?
We met in Portugal in 2019.
Yeah, your voice and your face is super familiar.
Right. Well, I have a lot less hair when you first met me.
Yeah.
I had gone to, well, I knew Jane, and then I met you through Jane.
Ah, cool.
Yeah.
We're in central Portugal. And actually thinking to move back down to the Algarve, where we used to live 12 years ago, which is exciting. Yeah.
Nice. Nice to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you.
Elisangela. Elisangela?
Hi.
Where are you? Where are you
Yeah, I
based?
know, but I'm used to Elisangela, so it's cool. Yes, I'm Elisangela from Mozambique. Nice to meet you. Nice
Are
to
you
meet
in
you.
Mozambique? You're in Mozambique now?
Yes, I am.
Anna, welcome.
Hi, Adrienne.
Thank you.
Hi. Sorry. Oh, here I am. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all. I'm in Ireland. I'm in close to Dublin.
Right.
I want to apologize at the beginning by saying I'll be moving around. I may have my camera off at times. I'm a little tired this evening, so but I'll be listening all the time.
No
Sure.
problem.
Thanks.
We're just letting a few people filter in.
Yep.
Tonight, we're going to welcome Peter Littlejohn Cook to speak, and I'll talk about what you might have read. And we're going to invite everyone to a community body poem, which has been a regular feature of some of these calls. I think we'll begin very soon. We'll just see if a few more join. I'll allow, if everyone's okay, I'll allow others to join at any time. And I'm recording this. These recordings are available on Pete's YouTube channel and my own, Fire of the Heart. Is that your?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fire of the Heart, Pete Bampton, and mine's Integrating Eros, this name here on YouTube. This was a series that we were calling the Shiva and Shakti Temple Talks, and we have a retreat coming up in Portugal, 28th of March, and we've decided to rename it Embodied Awakening Retreat, Easter Immersion, and these calls also to point to the more practical focus of this rather than a philosophical focus, mainly. And we had many requests to change the name, so we've yielded. Okay, I think we've gathered a good number for the start. Oh, here's one more. Roll off. Yay.
JP should be joining at some point.
Just let roll off in and JP can join us. So where? Hey, Roloff. It's connecting audio.
And
Welcome,
Sandy.
Roloff. And Sandy, we haven't heard from. Yeah, Sandy, would you like to say hello before we begin?
There she is.
Hello, everyone.
Good to meet you, Sandy.
Nice to meet you all.
Thanks for joining.
Great. Yeah, great to be here. It was through Paula, so, very grateful. And really glad I'm here.
Thank you for joining. Awesome. So I invite you for the first 7 to 10 minutes into what's called a community body poem. And this is an opportunity for us to meet on a bodily level, on what sensation, what's alive in our bodies, in our body mind right now. And I invite you to get really comfortable, to be supported at your back if possible. So just getting comfortable for a moment. If you need to shift a little bit to support your body, this supports us to come out of the action sympathetic nervous system and down into down regulation a little bit with the back support, telling the body that there's nothing it needs to do. There's nowhere you need to go, and that this time is for you to notice what's going on in your inner landscape for a while, separate from our stories and the rest of the day that's been before us and what's coming ahead. So inviting you to feel this support if you've now got some for your spine. And it might be interesting to pay attention to the effect of gravity on your whole body. So what would it be to let go of the holding in my muscles and tissues? And would it feel supportive for me to yield and to relax into gravity, hugging me down to the chair, to the earth beneath? And we bring our awareness zooming out and generally being aware of all the muscles and tissues of the chest, the legs, the arms, the face. And noticing the breath entering the body and exiting the body. And as we breathe, in and we notice our whole body in gravity, we can get a sense of the lift and the effortlessness of our belly rising and falling with the breath, without an agenda to change it, just to become aware of it. And then there can be an invitation to release the body to the in-breath and release the body to the out-breath. We're not consciously trying to deepen the breath. We're just inviting, how would it be to let go more and more into each in and out breath, giving more spaciousness, letting go of anything that wants to leave. And I invite you into a soft inner smile to the life force that's animating the breath. The natural rising up through gravity that the inhalation brings. And the expansion and deepening that's possible on the inhalation. And planting in this inner space full permission to notice what's alive in me. Is there an emotional tone, a thought, a feeling, a sensation? And I invite you to, if you're unmuted, speak a word or words that come close to describing what are you noticing right now in this moment? Is it on a sensation level? Is it something in your surroundings or something else? And if you feel to type it, I invite you to lean forwards and type it in the chat, or if you prefer to speak it out. And we're going to feel and hear each other's words, and I'll combine those and read them back as they appear as a community body poem, coming into one body in this Zoom meeting, united by our sensation and receptivity to each other's resting tone as we enter this space together this evening.
Contentment.
Contentment.
Release.
release,
expansion,
expansion,
enjoyment,
enjoyment,
Back to zero.
back to zero, connectedness, so continue to share as they come up or type them in the chat. And as you hear other people's words, our associative memory channels start to fire, and we might have other sensations or noticing as we open to receive each other in this space. Full acceptance of exhaustion, letting go of trying to smile or engage, deeply happy. Contentment, release, expansion, enjoyment, back to zero, connectedness, back to zero. Arriving, back to zero. Full acceptance, release, contentment, expansion, enjoyment, arriving, letting go, release, back to zero, arriving, contentment, expansion, enjoyment, back to zero, release, connectedness, flow, full acceptance of exhaustion, letting go of trying to smile or engage, deeply happy, relaxing into pain, heaviness, excitement, expansion, enjoyment, release, contentment, back to zero. Conscious light, expansion, enjoyment, flow, relaxation, tiredness, relaxation, heaviness, relaxation, heart space, compassion, back to zero, enjoyment, contentedness, connectedness, flow, conscious light, relaxing into pain, heaviness, heart space, compassion, transcendence of attention, expansion, conscious light, flow, arriving, full acceptance, arriving, relaxing into pain, heaviness, relaxation, tiredness, relaxation, compassion, heart space, transcendence of attention, expansion, forgiveness, relaxation, arriving, letting go, back to zero, expansion, enjoyment, flow, letting go, back to zero, forgiveness, transcendence of attention, compassion, heart space, expansion, joy, release, contentment, back to zero, transcendence of attention, relaxing into pain, heaviness, relaxation, tiredness, relaxation, heart space, compassion, forgiveness, transcendence, back to zero, arriving, deeply happy. Thank you all for sharing your inner landscape and words this evening to form a community body poem. And in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Peter Littlejohn Cook, a long-term friend of mine, who I met at a wedding, a very conscious, beautiful wedding, and had the pleasure of sitting opposite. And it was like everybody at the wedding just disappeared, and Peter and I got to connect for this beautiful moment of time where we finally met after some exchange of emails. And I've had the pleasure of being on retreat with Peter and experiencing his teachings. Tonight, Peter's going to share a little bit about Tantra. We're not here to define what the true Tantra is. We're here to share some inquiry and spur some discussion and share some of our experiences and hear from all of you. And one of the things that we're delighted to hear from Peter is a little bit of context on the word and modern use of the word Tantra, and some of the ways that I find very complementary to inquiring as to if anything of a modern practice or any practice that we're doing might be tantric. So Peter's going to share some of the insights into looking at the multi-dimensional aspects of practices, aren't you, Peter? So over to Peter Littlejohn Cook. Thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone else who's here. These recordings can be found at Fire of the Heart, Pete Bampton's YouTube channel, and mine, Integrating Eros. This was a series of talks that have been recorded, and we've changed the name, but they're all up there on YouTube. On YouTube, they used to be called the Temple Talks, Shiva and Shakti. So you can find this recording with those after tonight and share it if you feel to. And welcome, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Julian, and thanks, Pete, for the invitation to be with you. So, and thank you all for joining. Like Julian said, I won't be trying to, let's say, preach what the only true view of what is Tantra or what is true Tantra, but it's I can share a framework that I came up with as a result of giving courses about Tantra, beginners courses and courses for people that have experience with Tantra, people who are tantric therapists, teachers within the field of Tantra. And so the challenge arose to, first of all, be able to define what we're talking about. And it was in that context of sharing and teaching that the need for some kind of definition came up. And so it's not meant as to position myself as the expert who can tell everyone else what Tantra is, but just as a framework that has been useful. And like Julian said, it'd be interesting to hear from your experience, what is meaningful to you from what I'm sharing, and what you've experienced that can be a helpful input to this exploration. So I suppose a good place to begin is the word itself, right? The word itself is often presented as meaning to weave together. The idea of the core elements of existence being woven together, creating the totality. So the word, a popular translation of it, and one that I like because of what it evokes, is to weave together. When we and I could give just a little more context on that, which is weaving together for the sake of wholeness. So like the word yoga, referring to union, also joining. Like the word religion, originally evoking the idea of reconnecting, religare in Latin. So all these words are evoking the sense of connection, bringing about wholeness. one of the controversial aspects, let's say, of the question of what's real tantra would be if you've been in the field or studied and researched and engaged in forums on the subject, you'll see people sometimes quite upset about different approaches, and some saying this is the only real approach to tantra, and others saying no, tantra is whatever you want it to be. So given these disagreements and given the difficulty in people coming to an agreement really on what is tantra, that's why it can be challenging and interesting to explore this question. So the word neo-tantra comes up when the question of what is tantra is put, and sometimes the word neo-tantra is used as a put down, you could say, when someone is saying it's not real tantra, it's neo-tantra. So some people will use the word as implying something less good, less real than tantra. But that's not necessarily the only way to use the word. It's simply, it arose originally with Osho. And Osho was teaching something that is in some ways derived from Tantra, but he recognized that it was not traditional Tantra. And so he posed the term Neo-Tantra for his own work. And since then, Neo-Tantra has become applied to not just Osho's work, but any let's say Tantra related work that is modern and that doesn't have some characteristics that are considered traditional. So it's a way to refer to a new phase of Tantra, let's say. Some people use the word neo-Tantra to mean any Tantra that has a sexual component. So someone would use that term in that context thinking, well, Tantra, normally it's not about sex. And so there's this other approach that is about sex and sexual energy and sexual pleasure. And so if that's the orientation, then it must come under the classification of Neo-Tantra. Some who might consider themselves tantric purists would say that would take that position. Tantra is not about sex. Some going to the extreme of saying it has nothing to do with sex. And so to bring some clarity to this kind of these different perspectives, it can be useful to look at some of the older classifications that existed of different approaches. There was what's referred to as left-hand Tantra and right-hand Tantra. You could say that these are the core distinctions that existed traditionally, let's say in a simplified perspective, because there are actually multiple traditions, multiple approaches. The traditions have existed for, depending on whose studies you believe in, you could say thousands of years, or you could say close to a couple of thousand years. So it's a general, what we're going to be speaking about here is inevitably in the course of, let's say, an hour together, we're going to be making some generalizations, but a good simplified generalization would be using this terminology of left-hand and right-hand Tantra as a way to simplify things. So left-hand Tantra, you could think of as involving ritual of some kind, involving objects for ritual, involving substances, involving potentially also a partner for ritual purposes. Whereas right-hand Tantra can be described as interiorizing all the ritual objects and substances and the, let's say, the partner in the right hand tantra is the divine. It is your union with the divine that is being worked with. You could call it your union with the fullness of your being. So the ultimate union is your wholeness, rather than a union ritualized with another person or with other objects, substances. So that gives a very quick overview of left hand and right hand tantra. Left hand ritual and external objects or partner for the practice of ritual, and right hand tantra is inner practice. Right hand tantra can be a path of celibacy, which is radically different to what people associate with tantra. When the word tantra today evokes sexual practices for improving relationship, all the let's say common ideas that have arisen today about tantra, it can be surprising to think of tantra as having been practiced to a great extent by celibates. And often, without giving this introduction, I will joke about this by beginning by asking people, who do you think the most famous tantra teacher is? And the most common response is Osho. And then I say, well, maybe, but it may be the Dalai Lama, which often will be a shock to people. Wait a minute, the Dalai Lama, tantra, but isn't tantra about sex? How can the Dalai Lama be a tantra teacher, right? Because of the association that people have with it. It's a sexual practice. And so it seems strange to associate it with a monastic tradition within Buddhism. But the tantric tradition is very strong in Tibetan Buddhism in the form of Vajrayana. And the Dalai Lama is you could say, traditional teacher of Tantra. So hopefully that gives some context already, some sense of distinctions between approaches, the fact that there are radically different approaches, and both of them are considered traditional tantra, right? The left-hand path, the right-hand path. And I can give the framework that I've used to introduce the subject, and hopefully this will be also helpful to you. This will take a little longer, but 5 minutes perhaps of explanation. I'll try to keep it short. There are some key aspects that, if they're all present, and Julian mentioned, what could be the components or characteristics that would define a tantric practice. So in that context also, this could be helpful. I'll begin by actually contrasting it with what could arguably be said to be not tantric. The idea that if you, and I'm going to say this with some joking, I don't want to upset people too much with my humorous approach to it, but you could say that people may have the idea that if you add incense, candles, and some mantras to sex, you've got tantra. That's, you just make it a little mystical, little exotic, maybe some Kama Sutra positions, and then it's tantra, because you've added some mindfulness, some attention, some care to the context, and then it becomes tantra. So I would propose a different way of looking at it, which is that there is not just, let's say, a quality of mindfulness brought to sexual experience, sexual intimacy, but an additional and really fundamental component, which is the intention. In, let's say, modern Tantra, or Neo-Tantra, if you like, and I'm actually, in this case, not referring to Osho's Tantra, but most of Neo-Tantra, what has become Neo-Tantra, it's generally characterized as being about improving relationships, having wonderful, amazing sexual experience, and increasing your ability to enjoy sex. So that's typically the focus. Not everyone who works with Tantra or who calls themselves a neo-tantric practitioner would necessarily fall exactly neatly into that. But I'm, like I said, speaking in generalities to some extent. What I sometimes say is that those wonderful experiences of improving relationship, deepening sexual connection, sexual pleasure, these can be side effects of tantric practice, but they're not the goal of tantric practice. They're not the purpose, they're not the reason you practice. And the orientation makes a difference to the outcome. So I would say that a true Tantra would be rooted in the commitment to liberation. And you can think of liberation, again, trying to be succinct and speaking in simple terms, you could say that liberation is managing to release your beliefs, attitudes, habits in how you normally experience your sense of self, your ties to concepts, and able to come into full aliveness, full beingness, a sense of contentment and fullness as, let's say, an inherent quality of your being. Knowing yourself as that fullness. You could think of that as a way to speak of liberation. And perhaps to make it easier for this idea of liberation to be meaningful, again, contrasting it, you could say that if you're feeling always that you have to achieve something, be something, do something, change something in order to be more happy, more free, more evolved, more something, then that is the condition in which you're really seeking some kind of liberation from your discontent, your restlessness. So with liberation as the fundamental goal, not just liberation from a temporary desire for someone by being with that person, but a liberation from the fundamental sense of not knowing who you are, what the nature of existence, self-existence is. And there's a term that comes up and that's relevant here to describe the true nature of our being. Not specifically to the tantric tradition, you find this across the spiritual traditions in India. Sat Chit Ananda, which can be translated as being, consciousness, bliss. And so the practices that are really intending to bring about this realization, lived realization of being, consciousness, bliss, those practices, whether they are inner practices, practices with ritual, practices with a partner, if they're oriented towards this ultimate realization, you could consider them tantric. If they are helping you experience a change in your relationship, a change in your sexuality, that can be certainly therapeutic. It can be wonderful on many levels, but it could be argued that it's not technically tantra without that component of liberation at its core. And another characteristic of tantra, and I've identified 4 that I find helpful to speak of, to try to simplify this subject of what is tantra. The goal of liberation, moksha, as one of them. Another would be, you could say that the tantric tradition has been always, at some level, non-conformist, rebellious in some ways, counter-cultural in some ways. And so the application that's given to that in let's say, Neo-Tantra is of questioning our sexual repression, our usual approaches to our inhibitions, our taboos around sexuality. That's one way in which you could say non-conformity is applied within modern Tantra. But this principle of non-conformity is there not just for the sake of, again, not just for the sake of transforming our experience of sexuality, but our experience of ourselves, the way we interact with all beings, the way that we experience life, moment to moment. So non-conformity is a second, let's say, fundamental component. And the honoring of the feminine, or the divine feminine, or you could put it this way, honoring of the divine as feminine. Honoring of the divine as feminine. This is another of the core components that's common across tantric traditions. And this is not just about having a female representation of the divine in the form of a goddess or multiple goddesses. There is, I would say, a more fundamental purpose and outcome. It's not just a matter of gender equality and, you know, we have masculine representations of the divine, so we should have feminine ones, and that's better. That's great, but there is another aspect to this that I feel is the real potency of this aspect of it, which is the effect of the purely masculine representations of the divine has tended to be leading us to think of the divine as beyond, as transcendent, as celestial, as up there and out there and after life, perhaps, you know, this other level of reality. And what you find within the tantric tradition and the honoring of the divine as feminine is that the divine is also the universe itself. It is embodied reality. All of, let's say, the world, all of experience, all of the universe, all that is in existence is seen as Shakti, as divine power. And so you're given a viewpoint, a framework within which you relate to the divine at all times. Unavoidably, you are in relationship, in expression. You are an expression of the divine, unavoidably, inherently, rather than seeing the divine as this thing that you might come into contact with if you behave well after you die. You're immersed, you are an expression of the divine. So this honoring of the divine as feminine has this very complete change in our way we see ourselves in our relationship to the world, our relationship to the body, our relationship to our desires, our relationship to everything. We are embedded in sacredness. And a fourth component to complete would be in my framework, right? So this is just a framework that you can accept or reject or add to or take away from, do whatever you like with. But my fourth component would be compassion as a core characteristic, the desire to be of service to others, of service for the sake of the liberation of all beings. And that's a particularly Buddhist way of framing it. The attainment of liberation in order to be of service in the liberation of all beings from suffering. But although that's a particularly Buddhist approach, Buddhist framing of it, you find the attitude of service also present in non-Buddhist tantra, in what could be classified, not let's say technically correctly, but could be generalized as Hindu tantra, non-Buddhist tantra. I could go on for a long time, but I'm really happy to also listen to you and for us to talk and see what would be useful as a follow-up from what I have shared. Pete suggested that I speak a bit about my experience, but I've already taken up quite a lot of time with this overview, and so I'm happy to go where the conversation flows.
Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Peter.
Thanks. Does anybody from the people joining us this evening want to share or ask or comment?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Peter, for that overview. I'm very new to the world of Tantra, but it was really helpful because I'm somewhat confused by it, actually. But I found your description of the divine masculine as being something beyond extremely interesting. I had never thought about that before. And I'm really speaking from a position of ignorance, but except not quite ignorance, because I'm actually going through a very, very strong transformational process at the moment. But the one thing I just wondered about was when you said the divine feminine as being a very important component of it. I just wondered then about the divine masculine, because I know from my own point of view, I have such a deep desire to the divine masculine present in the world, whereas there seems to be a lot of focus on the feminine. So there's just anyway, I have many questions, but
yeah,
thank you for that. It was great.
Thank you for feedback, and I can give a little response to that, because it sounds like what you're saying in relation to the desire to see the divine masculine alive in the world, that you're referring to, let's say, a healthy, sacred, and you could call it divine masculine, embodied, right? Embodied. And like you said, there is a lot of celebration of the divine feminine arising in spiritual culture, certainly, and in not just in spiritual culture, but it's being emphasized. So what I would say is that when in Tantra, Shiva and Shakti are spoken of, it's actually not specifically about, let's say, men and their sacredness and women and their sacredness. It's actually a different, you could say that masculine and feminine are being used more in symbolic terms. And so the archetype within the non-Buddhist Tantra, the more Indian Tantra, the archetype for the masculine is Shiva. And Shiva, for the most part, doesn't represent a man. Shiva actually represents eternity, represents the vastness of beingness, pure consciousness, what the Buddhists might call Buddha mind, Buddha nature, unconditioned beingness. And so it's not the, let's say, idealization of a man, but a reference to the unconditioned self, genderless, really, unconditioned self. And Shakti, although these are depicted in some contexts, not in all contexts, that's the thing that can take a bit of time to figure out, is that Shiva is sometimes depicted as in a human body, as a man, right? And Shaktis are represented as goddesses, again, in human bodies, as women. But they are, let's say, these images are portals to something that is beyond the human form, beyond our understanding of gender embodied in human beings. There, to some extent, in some stories, they also play into masculine and feminine and man and woman, but that's a relatively small component of the use of these symbols, and so Shakti is divine energy, which is why it's not, let's say, something that only women are or only women have. All of existence, all of manifest existence is composed of Shakti. So in that sense, you could say a man is 100% Shakti, right? The physical form. It's all Shakti, as all that we can see and touch is Shakti.
I think I understand now. I think you're talking about the traditional theistic religions would have always looked at the beyond, the next life, if you like. Whereas I think the feminine principle you're talking about is the fact maybe that in the Tantra movement, we're looking at what's here or who we are in this moment. Yeah, thank you for that. I don't want to take up any more time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it was an important thing to clarify. Yeah.
It'd be interesting who, excuse me, who here has some inquiry so that we could map the time a little and see if there's any similarities of questions. So I would love to have a check-in now for who's got something burning or some inquiry that they would love to have unpacked a little bit tonight, or a request for a certain type of practice that we might share, and then we can split the rest of the time up. These sessions are usually 90 minutes. Excuse me again. So who here has something that they might like to touch on, and we can see what we have time for, and maybe there might be a line of inquiry that might have some similar questions.
And I invite anyone who fundamentally disagrees to speak up as well. That's always interesting to see. We can go deeper through seeing where what I've said just totally contradicts your understanding.
Mm. And I'm curious, those that attended that haven't been to other calls, and I thank you for giving this a try and coming tonight. What if you don't have a question, but what brought you here tonight? Like, what's the inner calling? Like Rumi said, what you're seeking is seeking you. So if we knew what brought you here, maybe we can meet and find a touch point with why you've shown up in this call with these friends and other beings.
Can you put us back on full screen?
I've put us back on the shared screen. Yeah, not
Yes.
pinpoint. Yeah.
It's also nice to have a few more women with us here tonight than we've had.
Yeah. Thank you for showing up. The topic, the change in title is a focus on the embodiment. Peter there mentioned about embodiment. And for the retreat, it's an exploration of how can we explore polarity and explore these different aspects of self that show up in any gendered body and any identification. So we're curious here what practices translate well across the screen to get a felt sense of some of these principles. So I'm curious, Pete or Peter, or others here, Pola's a tantra teacher, friend of ours as well. In your experience, what supports to get a sense of this pure consciousness or pure expression in the dynamic? So the original title of these talks was the sacred dance of Shiva and Shakti. So I could put it back to Peter Littlejohn Cook, but I'm opening this up as an inquiry for anyone to share experience of how these different aspects of Tantra show up in your life, or what you've practiced in order to gain a deeper awareness of these principles in the living experience of human relating and spiritual practice.
I could share something just briefly to add on to what Peter was just saying in terms of the Shiva and Shakti principles that transcend gender, let's say. In other words, they're accessible, they're divine polarities, we could say, that are available to all of us, men and women. And an aspect of my experience, especially in working for many years with men, is that I think one of the key components for men to not only bring online what we could call the divine masculine, in other words, a masculinity that's sourced in Satchitananda, as Peter was saying, being consciousness bliss, but also to bring online what we could call Shakti, or more the divine feminine side, is brotherhood. Because most men, if they have a more meaningful or profound or intimate relationship, it's usually with women, and I'm talking generalizations here. That was certainly my case in my younger adult life. And while men can tend to have a lot of fun together and compete and joke and enjoy, you know, there's a taboo in the West, especially amongst men, to not expose one's vulnerability. And yeah, I think we're all aware of that. But it's definitely my experience over many years now that when men actually recognize the value of brotherhood, of coming together with other men, there's a beautiful phrase that Robert Bly used to describe this. He called it the sound that male cells sing. And in that coming together in brotherhood, if it's really deep spiritual brotherhood, not only is the divine masculine potentially discovered and magnified, but also what we could call the divine feminine, which would manifest more as a capacity to feel, an open heart. And I often characterize the divine masculine as more to do with a strong spine, a strength that's sourced in humility. So, and then it's interesting to see, but I've observed in my work also with men and with women, that the more a man is able to bring online and integrate the masculine and feminine essence, Shiva Shakti, in himself, and the more a woman is able to do the same, we don't become these androgynous, depolarized creatures. Men become more fully who they are as men, and women vice versa, because we start to discover a spiritual freedom and embodiment that is sourced in the divine, that is not to do with trying to be equals or competing or reacting in this war of the sexes that so characterizes Western culture.
Peter, well, has anybody got a response to that? Lisa, great.
So I'm doing the teacher training with Peter at the moment, and one of the things we discussed was radical honesty. And so beyond sort of masculine, feminine principles, Tantra to me really feels like an honesty, you know, like really showing up and really really being honest in the world. And that takes a lot of courage, you know.
Mm. Thanks, Lisa.
Can you say a bit more about your experience of that? Also as a woman?
Yeah. So looking at the parts, so in my personal experience, looking at the parts of myself that have been very uncomfortable to look at, and being really honest with myself about those parts, and trying to integrate them, and not feel shame around them. And also through doing that, trying to create a space where other people can do that too, you know, where there isn't shame around who we are or how we express ourselves or what our truths are. Because it still feels like a lot of people are moving through the world with masks on. And to me, my feeling of Tantra is that it goes much deeper than that. It asks us to go much deeper than that. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
I would like to add to this that the path of liberation of the soul, eventually of the soul, but then here of earth, it's the liberation from ego, and that requires self-awareness and honesty with ourselves, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to see and understand what we want to liberate ourselves from. There would be no there would be no reason. So that's the inner honesty. And then the love helps us to not be ashamed and guilty of the ego, the protection patterns, the masks that we learned to wear. And that's also the compassion part. To be compassionate with ourselves and loving ourselves is the key to liberate ourselves in that process.
Thanks,
May I ask a question and follow up to what Peter has just said? sorry. Yeah, my question would be, if we talk about liberating ourselves through the path of Tantra, supposing we were taking another path to liberate ourselves that wasn't or all paths to liberation Tantra is my question. Like, what makes the path to liberation a tantric one, as opposed to, say, I don't know, meditating in a cave? But is that the same thing, basically?
Yeah. Well, this I can answer that and also bring together some of the things that have just been talked about, you know, in relation to the courage, the honest, radical honesty, and the self-awareness. Tantra has been stated to be a lightning fast approach to liberation. In the Buddhist tradition, where the idea of reincarnation is part of the worldview, it is stated specifically that Tantra is a path that enables you to experience liberation in this lifetime, in a single lifetime, which is a radical statement within that worldview, where it is usually taken for granted that, you know, it's going to be lifetimes. You're going to dedicate yourself to lifetimes of practice, and eventually you'll experience liberation. And so there's something in particular about Tantra that is seen as different to, even within Buddhism, to the non-tantric approach, the sutra approach. One reason for it is the radical honesty, which involves being able, willing, committed to looking at ourselves and the world in ways that engage with what we would otherwise be too afraid to look at, too afraid to come into contact with, in ourselves, first of all, you know. And so the willingness to actually work with our fear rather than avoid what is fearful is one of the key components that really accelerates your path to liberation. You're not delaying that resolution by moving away from what is uncomfortable. You're actually challenging your discomfort. So that's one way which you could say that among the many ways to work towards liberation, Tantra has this, and you can think of it as part of the non-conformity, if you like, you know, if you're thinking of that framework that I presented, it may be normal to move away from what's unpleasant, what you're afraid of, and what is taboo and what is rejected by everyone else. But for you to investigate it, right? For you to listen, let's say, to what's going on inside, when normally you would try to just make yourself feel better, you know? So it's a way to directly challenge the avoidance techniques that we can come up with for delaying resolution and delaying a sense of integration and a sense of wholeness, ultimately.
And that, if I can just follow on from that, Peter, that to me feels like real embodiment, you know? It's like if you can sit with discomfort, and if you can sit with the different things that arise, whether they be, you know, positive feelings or more challenging ones, if you can really sit with those, that's what embodiment is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a good way to describe Tantra as an embodied spirituality. And one way to think of it historically is that there was a tendency for transcendent spirituality to actually, like you said, Adrian, you know, going into the cave, going into meditation in a sort of a retreat movement, retreating from life into quietude and isolation. And the tendency can go to extremes, as in the story of the Buddha. Before he found the middle way, he was going through the extreme of you could say, putting the body through the greatest challenges of self-sacrifice, of giving up comfort to extreme levels. And yeah, I can't remember what else I was going to say. It's slipped my mind now.
I was going to say something, Peter.
May I jump back in again? Do you mind? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Adrienne, were you going to?
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So, yeah, you see, it's. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit awkward. I'm not trying to just undermine everything you say. I'm really trying to understand. But I would say for almost all of my life, I've been facing my fears, certainly since I started to become awake, which was around about my early 30s. And I would say my entire spiritual practice and emotional practice is about facing the worst fears I have. But yet I would never have thought I was on a tantric path. And it was only last summer that I went on a tantric retreat. And yeah, so I have this curiosity, and there has been great shift since then. But yeah, just trying to, yeah, I'll be quiet.
Yeah, no, you're not undermining what I'm saying at all, and it gives me an opportunity to just kind of reinforce the thing that I was saying in some sense. You know, the challenge of your fears is one component and a really important one. But if you want to use this framework to get a sense of is something tantric or not, you could say, well, is there also the relationship to all of life as sacred, right? I refer to Shakti being the universe. So therefore, another way to put that is everything is divine and sacred, all of existence, inherently. So if that is also part of your worldview or what you are practicing, let's say, you're practicing that relationship, inviting yourself to experience the world that way. If that component is also there, then that would be another one of the ingredients, you could say, of the tantric approach. Yeah.
We could say, though, you can consciously pursue and use the framework or other that Peter has laid out to consciously craft a life that you wish to feel is authentically tantric. But there are many in the last few years, and actually why I've come to be collaborating with Pete Bampton is there are many other things that don't identify as tantric, but if you pass them through those criteria or alignments to the 4 elements that Peter has shared tonight, they could be seen to be tantric. And I find that quite beautiful, that not only people who aspire to be tantric practitioners, to me it also alludes to the universality of natural laws and how those divine, you could say divine law, is manifest through multiple streams of consciousness and traditions and practices. And I found that quite warming to look at. For example, body poem that I practice is based on radical acceptance and the understanding that without self-awareness and acceptance, how are we ever going to evolve and change? But the irony that to fully accept yourself as you are is the greatest catalyst to change. That so I think what Adrienne is sharing, you know, you might have been since your mid-30s a tantric adept and not even known it. You know, you could smile and say, oh, wow, yeah, I really align to those values, and actually I could call myself a tantric practitioner, or I could enjoy the benefits of these similarities and overlap between tantra and what I was already doing. And I see that happen more and more, Peter, in really great things that are working well in the world, as in service of humanity, liberation, compassion, and respect for all manifest forms of life, for example.
Yeah, I like what you said about universal principles, you know, because it could be said that not all paths are tantric, but there are elements of tantra, there are, let's say, tantric principles embedded in all paths to liberation. Because tantra, you could think of it as spiritual technology. It's basically what works, right? And so many traditions have found approaches that are helpful, that work. And so there are parallels between what you find in, let's say, formal tantric tradition and in other traditions. There's very clear parallels between them. And what you find in tantra that you may also not find in other traditions, because of the non-conformity, tantra is willing in many cases to question its own language, let's say, its own framework, and kind of say, okay, at this stage this will be helpful, but ultimately you'll be able to let that go too. So there's a detachment to its own practices, its own teachings, acknowledging that they're useful at certain stages, and often you don't find that in all traditions, because they tend to kind of solidify, ossify, become dogmatic. And this characteristic of non-conformity, when it's actually really lived and applied within the tantric tradition, again, another of the reasons why it can take you to liberation with that speed, that potency, because it's allowing you to detach even from the things that you're, let's say, getting attached to in your path, in your practices, in your experiences.
Yeah, I think another sort of angle on it is, as you're saying, Peter, there's these universal principles in any authentic spiritual teaching, but then there's this whole difference in orientation. And I was just reflecting on, why is it that what we could call tantra or tantric practice is broadly gaining in interest and popularity? And I think on the superficial level, it's to do with, sex and, all the fascination there is with that in Western culture. But I think underlying that, it's the longing for an orientation to liberation that embraces life.
Yeah.
And that is not only about freedom from the more transcendent orientation. And yeah, because another way to look at the tantric dimension, and it's definitely been my experience, and perhaps I will say resonate with you, Adrienne, that and perhaps also, as far as I'm aware, traditionally, tantra or the tantric embrace was brought or taught once the aspirant had actually become grounded to some degree in a more meditative, free, place of fundamental freedom from, greed, fear, or the conditioned experience. Because then one would be in a place to fundamentally be able to begin to embrace our embodiment, embrace relationship, come into the world. And this is also where I think the compassion comes in, as you mentioned. That's very much a feature of Tibetan Buddhism in particular. Then the orientation can shift, where one can come out of the forest, come down the mountain, so to speak, into the marketplace, into relationship, into emotional sexual relationship, and have a radically potentially transformed relationship to it, where one is not basically motivated to have and to get and to seek security. So then it's this very and this is where I think the countercultural dimension comes in, because to have a liberated relationship to body, mind, and world and sexual relationship, definitely challenges all the conventions about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I was participating for a few years in some gatherings called the Science and Non-Duality Conference, and I distinctly saw over the course of a few years the shift from a focus on, you could say, non-dual teachings, Advaita, and there's a sort of a contradiction that is hidden in a lot of the non-dual approach, which is it's actually dualistic. It calls itself non-dual, but it refers to all our experience as illusion, as Maya, as and so there is a sense of pointing to reality beyond your experience. You know, it's the way it is often applied is in this sort of transcendentalist kind of way. And it could be important to also say Tantra doesn't only say your experience is sacred and all of the world and the universe and all is sacred. It doesn't only say, it's not a way of saying, oh, you know, just drop all your spiritual practices because everything's already done, it's all sacred. It's not quite that. It can be misinterpreted that way, you know, that you can be just satisfied with things as they appear to be today. And this relates a bit to what Julian was saying about the radical acceptance that creates transformation. In engaging with yourself, with the world, with others, in this, let's say, from this starting point of sacredness, it's not that nothing changes other than you see it as sacred. Everything changes because you see it as sacred. And this also relates to what Pete was saying in terms of, you know, you won't be grasping for so much if there's an inherent sense of peace, an inherent sense of fullness, of freedom. And so there are subtle things that make a big difference. There are things that people might think, oh, that's tantric philosophy. The idea that the world is Shakti and the universe is sacred. It can sound like a belief system, something that you believe or don't believe, but it's something you practice and experience. It's not actually just philosophy. It's a way of engaging with the world, a way of tasting existence.
I'd like to point to something around trauma awareness and embodiment and this putting down of masks that I feel might be useful to share in the space around inner resource. So there's practices where we can look at metaphysical, emotional object resources that we might have on our body, in our space. And when I've done these practices, I've tuned into having a wish for others that we would have more connection to our inner resource. And this reminds me of, you know, Eckhart Tolle and other people's pointing out of the pain body, and something that Peter has just shared about, and Pete Bampton, about first practicing perhaps some detachment from the manifest world or conditioned world, and first finding some inner peace that we then may have the resource to come back to the world and practice in connection with our authenticity. And many layers can be seemingly in the way of that naturalness or sense of wholeness. And I mentioned it in another call that my friend Philip Shepherd talks about. The primary wound of our culture is a cleavage between thinking and feeling, and doing and being. And actually, how do we resource, you know, it's quite a privilege to have the resources, the space and time for contemplation. So I acknowledge that we've all had this and still have this time together tonight, and how lucky we are. and also the shift whereby we can, some talk about the spiritualized ego or the spiritual honeymoon as a gift towards letting go of some of those identification layers of pain or story which keeps us from bliss or Satchitananda. And obviously I'm not going to sum it up in 1 or 2 minutes, but I just want to point to something and see what the group have to share about our own personal journey within having challenges and suffering in life, and and then finding resource to move into authenticity, the power of vulnerability, and the resource necessary to let go of our strategies, which identify us as the one suffering and the one, you know, until we can lessen our grip on that identification. I found there wasn't the opportunity for growing the capacity to find resource in the face of ongoing potential challenge in life. So I'm talking about a resourcedness that enables us to, like the spiritual warriorship of facing life, resourced from the inside out rather than seeking being fixed from the outside in. And in that strength, being able to put down strategies of separation or creating more friction. I don't know if I've verbalized it very well, but the essence of it is around resource and vulnerability and authenticity, like Lisa shared about being truly honest. And until we identify them with radical acceptance or compassion, if we justify those positions and calcify to them, we can be further and further away from this felt sense of wholeness. Excuse my tickly throat. And if we can use embodiment practices to increase our felt sense, then we can align to a felt sense of wholeness, which eludes us if we try to come from a rational mind perspective, which could also play into justifying why I'm a victim or why the world is wrong or why so-and-so has harmed me. And I see in your practice, Peter, this understanding and inquiry is if we're receiving this kind of behavior that might be perceived as an attack, one way, like in nonviolent communication, is to bring to the compassionate heart the inquiry, what could have happened to this person for them to be acting in this way, in which unity comes and the potential for healing and transformation. So I feel quite tired tonight. I don't know if I was made that clear at all. I was a bit rambling, but something there about—
That was beautiful.
Oh, okay, Lisa.
It made a lot of sense.
That's very kind. Yeah. I think it's important from an embodiment perspective and also to understand the nervous system's role in that, and sovereignty and agency and choice, because once we start to trust, as Betty Martin says in The Wheel of Consent, once we start to trust, notice, value, and communicate our authenticity, then we live from a perspective of sovereignty or sacredness and self-respect, which can set healthy boundaries and limits around that vulnerability, but a courage to express it. And I think that's very powerful in support of people's evolution and ultimately liberation, but also moving from a suffering self to a happily empowered self that can then let go of the bridles of control of a personal ego and have the courage and spaciousness to step into the unknown, something like that.
Yeah. The question of what makes us disconnect from our, let's say, our wholeness, what makes us disconnect from peace, what makes us disconnect from others, what happens that gives us the impression of the feeling of fragmentation, which you could say is the beginning of a spiritual path, right? desire to bring about a change in what we feel, a change in what we're seeing, the search for sacredness, it comes from having lost the feeling of sacredness or the feeling of wholeness. And so a framework to make sense, you could call it a sort of a spiritual psychology, tantric psychology, is part of the component that I work with to help to, rather than just let's say trying to jump beyond concepts today, now, like just give them all up, just let them go. To some extent, there is that invitation as well. But if there is only that demand, let's say, that, oh, just throw away concepts are useless, then what you can find is that you're constantly judging yourself for having concepts and judging others for their concepts. So as part of the process, it can be helpful to see, how did we generate all this framing of things? How did we get so engaged in thinking and in conceptualizing? And part of the process can be to bring in helpful concepts, helpful during a process. I don't mean helpful in the sense that they will in any way substitute for reality itself, right? Or liberation and wholeness, but they can be softer. Let's say they dissolve ultimately these concepts. They're stepping stones rather than things that are rigid and that we hold on to. So connecting with some of what you shared, you know, we can end up in spirituality, in personal development, in our lives, we can find ourselves grasping onto the positive that we've experienced and the breakthroughs and the knowledge we've acquired. And we can find ourselves getting attached to it because we see it as good, as having been fundamental perhaps in our lives, as really helpful stuff. And so it can be difficult to let go of the good concepts, right? The ones that we've put in the place of ones that we felt were wrong concepts. It can be difficult to actually question the good ones, the ones that we've now acquired and become comfortable with. And this split that you're referring to, Julian, of thinking and being, or doing and being, thinking and feeling, to the extent that we can feel safe in this present moment. And that's partly about how we're thinking of things, and it's partly how we are relating to our bodies in this moment and our breath and the sensations. The feeling of safety it's multifaceted, let's say. Because if we've got really attached to a belief about someone who is present, or a situation that is arising, or something, if we're very fixated on a belief, a concept, we can find ourselves restless because of it, agitated, feeling unsafe because of something we're holding in our minds. But we can also be carrying agitation from years ago, which is leading to a chronic sense of not being safe. And by working with both these levels, what's in the body and what's in the mind, let's say, or what's repeated over and over as words, as narrative, by working with all that we carry with us to find the sense of safety in this moment, a tremendous amount of transformation takes place through finding the feeling of safety in the present. The courage, that radical honesty becomes natural, because so much of what we're trying to free ourselves from are defense mechanisms that arise as a natural result of feeling unsafe. So it's not useful to fight with those defense mechanisms. What we need to do is to go to the root of them, which is the feeling of not being safe. And so much of spirituality and so much of meditative practice is about a kind of conflict with the mind. But by changing the feeling state, those conflicts become meaningless. They don't arise. by shifting from a place of chronic dis-ease, chronic anxiety, restlessness, and you could say that it's part of the human condition, a certain degree of restlessness, a certain degree of agitation, which is partly because we've been taught that we are separate beings in space and time. And that brings, you could say, existential anxiety. I've got to protect myself to exist, to survive. And to some extent, there is let's say, a healthy component there of nature, right? Looking after itself, the self-defense mechanisms associated with nature's continuity. So there is a healthy component to the self-preservation instinct. But when you add to the self-preservation instinct nature's intelligence, when you add to it a conviction in separateness as your identity, then you can't let go of constant worrying about how you're going to make yourself safe, not just now, but in all moments. So you start to imagine problems in the future and thinking about how you've messed up your security by things you've done in the past. And it's all fueled by a fundamental conviction that you are this separate being existing in space and time. So this is another component, which you could say that what I was referring to as Shiva as your true identity. In the sense not of masculine is your true identity, right? Shiva is this transgender reality, beyond the concept of gender, the beingness. If the sense of beingness is recovered, then a lot of the agitation falls away.
And that's the resource that during these practices in the last years in multiple groups that I've felt inside me that I wished that more people had. And I realized what I've worked at it, but what a luxury to also have had the capacity, space and time to have worked at something that serves me as a resource and that I wished for more and more people. That reminds me of our space and time, Peter. We're coming up, or we are at 90 minutes. So I'd really like to thank Peter Littlejohn Cook and Pete Bampton and everyone who's joined us, and say once again that if you come to these calls and you share something that you don't want to be in the edit on YouTube, we do edit these so that personal shares are completely free and you can feel safe to share confidentially, and that we would edit those parts out. So as we were talking about safety, that reminded me to repeat that. And I would invite a quick checking in with everyone here, if you're willing, just a few moments more to come into a sense of stillness or integration now. Oh, one of our participants is coming back for a bit of integration. Here we go. So welcome Sandy back. So in service of integration and installation of what's been shared, before we all go, I invite us back into some stillness and calm, and back to this modality of body poem and listening through the body, not to the body as a separate something, but listening through and into our bodies now, noticing what's alive for us there as we come to a close of this session. I'm finding words that come close to describing what you might be noticing now as we come into the closing of this call. So we're not searching for words, we're not trying to define or explain, we're just bringing awareness to the aliveness of our being. And that's why we use the term, finding words that come close to describing what you're noticing right now. It would be lovely to hear some words in service of integration for how you're doing, what's alive in you right now, as we come to an end of this call.
Indefinable.
Connection.
buzzing heart,
presence, revealing what is here,
Light.
Indefinable light, revealing what is here, presence, a buzzing heart, connection.
Everything and nothing.
Everything.
Fun.
Fun. Indefinable, everything and nothing, a buzzing heart, connection, revealing what is here. Light and fun, indefinable, everything and nothing, presence, connection, a buzzing heart, revealing what is there, light and fun. Rising joy, there's a few in the chat there. Rising joy, fun and light, indefinable, everything and nothing, revealing what is here, connection with a buzzing heart, presence. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. It's great to have you with us.
Pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Really lovely to be with you.
And we'll be back next week. Next week, we are going to be exploring the, actually Peter demoed something which I would say is feel and follow touch. So I'd love Peter, if he has time, to come back next week. I'm going to be sharing with one of my students of relational bodywork our living experience of tapping into, feeling and following the body intelligence with respect to touch in bodywork sessions or tantra. So it'd be amazing if you could join us again, Peter, but
I'd like to.
cool.
I'll check if I can, but I'd definitely like to.
Beautiful.
And can I share briefly a couple of ways that people can
Yes,
stay connected with what I do?
please.
Lisa mentioned the teacher training. There's a new cycle of teacher training starting in April, beginning of April. And so feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to know more about that. And there's a Tantra Foundations program starting tomorrow. So again, if that interests you, then be happy to connect with you.
And what's
Send us those links, Peter, and we can put them both in the description of the videos.
Okay, great.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do that. And if people want to reach out to you, Peter, personally to find out more or to pursue mentoring or experience more of what you offer, I know you're doing a new website at the moment or something. So I know you're on Facebook.
Yeah, there's my email is peter@peterlittlejohncook.com, and there's a Telegram group that you can join to receive information as well. So that's really the substitute for my website at the moment, the Telegram group, which is t.me, which is the universal Telegram group thing, t.me/Tantra Portugal.
I'm typing these now. Let's just, and we'll put them in the notes to this video. Peter, if you can send them to me afterwards, so that they're correct, I'll put them in the notes and send them to Pete Bampton as well. So it's peter@peterlittlejohncook.com. Okay, and t.me Tantra Portugal.
/Tantra Portugal. It's www.t.me/Tantra Portugal.
Cool. Great. I've put them here in the chat for those that are still here, and we will share those with the video. And we'd love to have you back next week to talk about feel and follow touch. That would be awesome too.
Okay, great. Really lovely being with you all. Thanks for the questions, the interactions, the challenges, let's say. Yeah, pleasure.
It's been lovely to share the space with you, Peter. And we'll see everyone next week who can make it. Thank you, everyone.
Big hug.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for popping in, Lucy.
Yeah, looking forward to the replay.
Yeah.